and the theme there was on millennials. And it was so popular that it was, as a speaker, in that particular theme, that he was encouraged to speak, which he did at the district Rotary meeting in Rochester. Some 65 clubs, or however many clubs are there. And that talk was written up in a national publication called Vitality Speeches. And Bob has done a great job. Now, getting back to his talk in 2017, he was our February speaker, and we just had 3-4 tables here, 5 tables maybe. And he spoke at that time on resilience and was extremely well received. He's spoken, he's given over 1,000 speeches around the country. He's been noted, and you probably saw that in the bio, but he's extremely well credited, and he's just a wonderful guy, and he's one of our members. So, Bob, thank you again for pinch hitting, and I know you'll do your usual great job. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to sit down.
You got to sit down here. Folks, two suggestions here. There is a brown handout there, and you might want to get a hold of it now. And the second suggestion is those of you who are facing the wall back there, you might want to turn your chairs around and make me feel a little more comfortable, and we don't have to call the orthopedic surgeon in. So I got to ask you something. Did you hear that little doubt, just that little doubt in Don's voice when he said that he hoped that Bob Veninga would be able to continue the tradition of good speakers? Did you hear that? I heard that little doubt there. Reminds me of the story of, this is in the Roman Empire times, and the Christians were fed to the lions. And so one day the Christian came out to be fed to a big lion. Oh my goodness, this lion was incredibly big and ferocious. And so he came up to the Christian and stopped, and the Christian whispered something into his ear. And the lion just was frightened and went back into his cage, scared as all get out. The emperor, who was watching all this, called the Christian over and said, "What was that all about? What did you tell the lion?" He said, "I told the lion that after lunch, there's going to be a boring speaker." That took a little while, folks. That took a little while. I'm really happy to be able to pinch hit, but I just got to say, before we get going here, I got to just say a few words of thanks. As you've been told, our club is the fastest growing club in the Midwest, and indeed one of the fastest growing clubs in the nation. I've been a part of, I don't know, I was going to say hundreds, that may not be an exaggeration, of organizations over the years. And I have never seen a club, a group, take off like this one. And the reason for it, I've learned, is that there is a web of people in this room right now who really care. I think, for instance, of Scott Plum, who a week ago emailed me a message and he said, "Is there anything I can do to be helpful to you?" Haven't we all had that experience where somebody says, out of the blue, "Can I be helpful to you?" I thought, what a wonderful thing. I can't help but think of Terry taking over the leadership. As old as some would say, is absolutely the glue to this club. Would you kind of agree with that? Yes. And I think of Sue and all the work she put in to publish this book. And I want to say, folks, if you have not purchased this book, you want to do it. And the reason for that is that this is our book, okay? This is the book of our club. It's not written by some fancy author. It's not written by a ghost writer somewhere. The things that are in here are the lessons that all of us have learned in life. And Sue, we thank you for all your work on that. I can't help but mention Lauren. I can't help but mention Lauren. You know, Don was quite right. The videos are incredible, the speakers that we've had here. And it would not be possible except that Lauren comes diligently to make the transfer. And so we thank you, Lauren, for all your work. Now, as I look over the room, I could go on and on, but I'm not. But I got to just confide a little bit with you about what has happened during the last 2 weeks, because you'll really be interested in knowing. It was only like 12 days ago that Don and Terry learned that our speaker would not be here. Now, can you imagine? I know that some of you, are in organizations where you've been responsible for getting a speaker. And so all of a sudden in 12 days, what is going to happen to our group? So Don called me up and I came over to his house. And this is the first time that I've had a long conversation with Don. And we talked about the club and his vision for the club. And he said to me, boy, if this isn't an optimistic statement, he said, we got to look upon this as an opportunity. Isn't that amazing? I said, that's an amazing thought. We got to look upon this as an opportunity. It's true that we had a speaker that all of us wanted to come and hear, and for very good reasons, it just didn't work out. But Don looked at me and says, let's try to think about this as an opportunity, which is what this club is all about. And then 2 days ago, I got a call from Don again, and I could hear that optimistic voice on the other end of the line, and he says, I'm shooting for an attendance record on Friday. Isn't that vintage, Don? Isn't that vintage, Don? So, Don, you've been our rock. Thank you. Thank you. Well, folks, I want to talk to you out of my heart today. And that's a little dangerous thing to say. And when I say that to my graduate students, I can see their eyeballs kind of roll back like, oh, get real, In graduate school, you're going to talk out of your heart, get real. And I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, is anything going to come out of the head today? That's what they're really thinking. And they've learned, though, that when that expression is used, that something important is going to take place in class on that day. So I don't use that expression lamely. I don't use that expression very often. But when I use it, it means that the things that I want to share with you today are terribly, terribly important to all of us. If there's one thing that all of us in this room want in our own personal lives, is to be resilient. I would say that there probably isn't anybody in this room who hasn't gone through some tough waters. And my guess is, in a group this size, that some of you are going through some tough waters right now, and you want to stay resilient. Some of you are probably concerned about your children, maybe your adult children, and they're going through tough times, marriages that just don't seem to work out, health issues that don't seem to work out, jobs that just seem to kind of disappear in this economy. And you kind of pray for those kids because even though they're adults, you say, I hope that they're going to be resilient. And we worry about our republic, right? We are very divided. We're very divided. And you wonder if this republic can stand all the divisions that are going on right now. I want to tell you, our republic has been divided before and we've survived. This is a resilient republic and we're going to survive and we're going to come together again. I believe that with all my heart. Now, for 34 years, I've been studying the concept of resilience. And I want to give you the backstory to all this. The backstory is that we've done 3 major studies at the University of Minnesota on resilience. And the first study was a study on occupational stress. And what we were really interested in was, why is it that 2 people can be doing the very same kind of work, and one goes home at the end of the day and is just totally burned out, and the other goes home at the end of the day and says, well, it was a tough day, but there's another day ahead. To give an example of this, I'm terribly concerned about teachers and the burnout rate among teachers. And yet we discovered in our own research that teachers who have a principal that is really a friend that can support them, that those teachers tend not to burn out. It doesn't mean that they don't have difficult days, but they tend not to burn out because they know that they've got the support of the staff. We know with real estate salespeople that all real estate salespeople have down years. How do they survive? It goes back to their supervisor. And those of you who are supervisors in here, I want to say to you in the most powerful way I can, your life makes a difference to every single employee that you are supervising. And the more guidance and the more encouragement you gave them can be the thing that keeps them from burning out on the job. The second study we did was on grief. It involved 125 people going through some of the most traumatic experiences of life. It was a difficult study. The study went on for a year. And we took 125 people who were going through serious marital problems, serious health problems, the death of a loved one, career reversals that they never thought they would have. And we're trying to figure out who survives these kinds of things, who bounces back from adversity and who doesn't. And if they do survive, how is it that they do survive? And the central finding there is that we discovered that people who have a support system, who really have a support system, those are the people who tend to survive. Now, it used to be thought that if you had one or two people to support you through a crisis, that's enough. That's not what we found. What we found is that the more people that you have that can support you, guide you, love you, get you through it, to affirm that things are going to get better for you in one way or another, those are the people who tend to survive difficult times. Now, the third study we did was an amazing study, which brings a smile to my face just thinking about it, because it was on retirees. And so in this room, we've got all kinds of retirees, and I've talked to you in this room. And I'm always amazed when I talk to the retirees in Optimist Club, you're doing things, okay? You're not sitting at home. One person today said to me, I'm not much for sitting at home. I need to get out. I need to do things. Thank you, Ralph, for that testimony there. What we discovered is that people, get this, that people who retire from something, and that's the motivation for retiring, don't get along nearly as well as people who are retiring to something. And there's all the difference in the world. Now, when you retire from something, you're retiring generally from a bad job, or you're just burned out, or you just wanted to get rid of all the stuff, the headaches. In a way, we all understand that, and in a way, people can still have a good retirement, even if that is their orientation to retirement. But what we discovered is that people who retire, who are retiring to something, they want to become involved in a service organization. They want to deepen their faith. They want to become a member of a community group. That those are the people who really tend to have great retirements. And so that's kind of the backdrop of the things that I want to talk to you about. So what I'm going to try to do is in 34 minutes, give you 34 years of research, okay? So I'm going to move kind of fast, kind of stick with me, but the things we're going to talk about are really in that handout, and you can follow that. Now, the 5 things I want to talk about are these. What we know is if you incorporate these 5 things into your life, I mean, this is not lip service, okay? This is not, oh, isn't that kind of interesting? I'm not talking about that level. I'm talking about buying into these 5 concepts, which incidentally, most of the people in this room, if not all, have done. But it tends to be needed to be deepened. The first thing that we discovered is that people who tend to be resilient, have what I might call adult guardrails. Now stick with me a minute. The first time I ever heard that expression was last spring. And one of my students, former students, who's had a marvelous career, was being honored by the University of Minnesota. I could hardly wait for the recognition. And they said to my former student all the things that he had done, and boy, I was like a peacock. I was really as proud as could be. And I thought to myself, I wonder what he's going to say in his acceptance talk. And he got up, and I'm paraphrasing, and he said, the thing that I am most thankful for in life is that I have had adult guardrails. I've had adults who are with me to keep me focused. I've had adults when I've tempted to make decisions that really were not in my best interest pull me back into the lane. I've had adults who, when I hit detours and potholes in my career, those were the adults that pulled me back. And he said, the thing I am most grateful for is that I've had individuals who have been my adult guardrails. I tell you, I'm thankful for the adult guardrails in my life. I had a class that wasn't going too well at the University of Minnesota. And normally my classes have a lot of fire in them. They're curious and there's energy. People come through the door and they're, generally ready to go. Not this class. And so I asked one of my dear friends, a man by the name of Lee Stoffer, who my dear colleague over here, Jim Hart, knows well. I said, come and be a part of my class and tell me what's going on. And so he came and he sat right in the middle of the classroom. And of course, I was a little anxious, and so I really prepared hard for that class. It doesn't matter how old you get or your accomplishments. You want to do good to somebody you admire. And so he sat there, and then we went out to Stub and Herb's. You all know where Stub and Herb's, see? Stub and Herb's? Okay. It's an icon. Some of you are it's an icon, right? So we went out to Stub and Herb's, right by the old Memorial Stadium, right? And he says, well, Bob, he says, I like the content you presented. I like the style in which you presented. Have you ever had everybody say something really nice and you thought, but is just around the corner? But I got to tell you something, Bob. I got to tell you something. You spent 15 minutes answering questions from your class, and I don't think you heard the questions. I said, what do you mean, Dean Stoffer? I'm sure I heard those questions. And he said, well, you may be right. Isn't it amazing when you use that phrase, you may be right? And my defensiveness went down. He says, you may be right and I may be wrong. But he says, there was one student that sat right up here in the front of the class, and she asked you a question right at the end of the class, and I don't think you heard it. I don't think you heard it. I said, well, I think I did. He says, well, talk to the student. So the next day I saw the student in the hallway. I said, come on in. Her name's Carolyn. I said, Carolyn, come on in. You raised a question at the last class. Did I answer your question? And she smiled and kind of giggled, and she says, no, but I'm sure you answered somebody else's question. Well, I learned something. And what I learned, it goes back to what Manny Stiles talked about so eloquently last time at our club meeting, that every person you meet, they want to be your presence. You have to be with people. And so I know that many of you are executives, many of you are in middle management, many of you are in government, and you've got people coming into your offices all day long. And I know it's hard to do this, but when you talk to them, that person has got to feel that that's the most important person that you're going to talk to during the day. And that's a skill, that needs to be learned. And we all need guardrails, and we need adults. This is a little different than mentoring, although it's similar. But it's not so much somebody telling us what to do. It's somebody who's there to share what they are seeing about our lives, and if asked, to give advice. Now you say, who should be the individuals in your guardrails? First of all, they should be competent, meaning they should know something about your field. So let's say you need a guardrail in your work. And let's say you're involved in a nonprofit agency. Well, you need a guardrail of somebody who understands nonprofit work, because nonprofit work is very different than profit-oriented work. Or if you're in a company, you need somebody who is also in the company. And I would suggest that appropriate guardrails are generally people who are 10 to 15 years older than you. Now get that. What that means is if you're 50, you probably need somebody who's 60, because they've been through some of the wars that you've been through. If you're retired, and let's just say you're retired and you're 65 years old, you need to talk to a 75-year-old. Somebody who's been retired for 10 years, and they tell you what they've learned by it. And so you want somebody who is competent. And so I don't think the guardrail is somebody who just, you have their name in a hat. I think it's somebody that you have to think about, and I think that guardrail changes as we age and as we move forward. I also think you need a guardrail who's got a sense of humor. the longer I live, I want my guardrails, my adults who are helping me to have a sense of humor. This summer, I decided to read biographies of presidents. And for all of you who love leadership studies, start getting into Lyndon Johnson's books about him. They're absolutely amazing. But I was into Ronald Reagan this summer. And apart from how you might feel about his politics, he had this wonderful sense of humor. And in one of the books, they described a group of senators on the opposite side of the aisle. And they charged into his office. They were going to convince him that his policy was wrong. Well, those of you who can remember Ronald Reagan, he could be fairly stubborn. And they came out, and he didn't move the president his position one bit. But they came out saying, you know, wasn't that an amazing hour? We like the guy even if we don't like the guy. Well, he had that quality called likability. And I think likability has to do with a sense of humor. When an attempt was made on President Reagan's life, he went into the operating room and he could see everybody, and all of the surgeons were in their masks, the nurses, and he looked around the room and he said, I hope all of you are Republicans. Before he went into the room, he was on a gurney. Before he got into the surgery seat, he was on a gurney. And one of his young aides came up to him and said, Mr. President, you will be pleased to know that the government is functioning normally. And he looked at the young man and he said, why do you think that would give me comfort? So when you look at those guardrails, all right, you want competence. You want probably people older than you that have experienced things, and you want somebody with a sense of humor. Now, the second thing that we learned is the importance of affirming when we are going through difficult times. And this is a tough one. That most problems in life are solvable. Now, many of the problems that we have in life, we can't solve them exactly like we want to have them solved, okay? But most problems, most issues in life are solvable. Particularly the little things that irritate us. Those are solvable. Not too long ago, my wife Karen and I went to Portland to visit family members. And I always enjoy the flight from Minneapolis to Portland. It's a lovely 3.5 hour flight. And so we were just getting into the plane, and I heard a baby screeching at the top of her lungs, way in the back of the plane. And I said to my wife, I said, boy, I sure feel sorry for the person who has to sit next to that. Well, guess who had to sit next to that? I couldn't believe it. I was sitting right next to this screaming baby who I learned later was 19 months old. And the mother, of course, was quite embarrassed. This kid was a holy terror. I mean, the mother gave her some fluid, and the kid put the fluid off like this, gave a teething ring, threw it down, and the more the child acted out, the more embarrassed that the mom was. She turned to me, she says, sir, I'm terribly sorry. She says, this is what her words were, but if you have patience, I'm going to get this turned around. Well, I wasn't so sure, and neither were the people around me. As the people went by me and this kid was screaming, you should have seen the looks that I got, like, you poor SOB that ended up with this. One grandmother type leaned over at me and she says, I'm going to be praying for you on this trip. I wasn't so sure. The plane took off, and then the mom took out her computer and connected to Wi-Fi. And she said to this little girl, you want to play games? And the little girl said, yes. And I want to tell you, software came up. And those of you who got kids or grandkids and babies, I mean, there's software for babies. Can you believe that? And so she said to the child, do you want to play easy or hard? And the child said easy. And so that little finger started to work. I've never seen anything like it. 19 months old. That finger was working like crazy. And then she got done with that, and the mom said, would you like to try hard? And she said, yes, it was a harder thing. And the mom said, would you like to follow this? I said, I really would. This is interesting. And the kid was as quiet as could be. About an hour later, the child wanted to go to sleep. And for the whole flight, the rest of the flight, she was sound asleep to the relief of everybody around us. Now, most problems we face in life are solvable. The problem comes when we think that the problem can't be solved. And I've worked with organizations who for years have lived with problems. Churches can live with problems. Nonprofits can live with problems. Companies can live with problems. And at the base is, we don't think it can be solved. I want to say that resilient people say, this is a tough situation, but I think we can get together and we can get this solved. Now, I want to just digress a minute. And we're talking about serious things to get through. Most of us want to get things fixed fast. We're fixers. And so as I look around the room, I know that you are employed in organizations where it's your job to fix things. I mean, that's what a manager does. You fix things. And we have, and particularly in American culture, we have this desire that we want to fix things fast, quickly, as can be. What we discovered in our study on grief is that it takes longer to get through crises than what we've ever imagined. Now, when I talk about that, it used to be in the literature that most people should be able to get through a crisis like in 1 year. So if you're going through a divorce, 1 year later, you should be on your feet again. If somebody that has died a year later, well, yeah, you're still grieving, but you should be able to get on your feet together. What we discovered in the research is that for most people, going through difficult experiences takes longer to get through than what we've ever anticipated. I was at a nursing conference not long ago, and a former student came up to me and she says, I was your student 23 years ago. And I said, don't remind me about that. That's a long time ago. She said, yeah, 23 years ago. She said, I took all of your classes. I said, well, that's great. That made me really feel good, all my classes. And then she said, but I think I've forgotten almost everything you taught. That was not so good. But she said, you know, I've been through some pretty tough stuff. But what I've learned is that it takes longer to get through things than what I ever thought. And so the second thing that we discovered again and again is that most problems in life are solvable. And so what I would suggest for those of you who are working right now and are in supervisory positions, that you take a minute and you think when you get back, what are the problems that are keeping us from moving to that next level? Could do over. I want to say the key to resilience is to put the exhaust, all those mistakes, and let it blow out of the back end of the car. There's a philosopher by the name of Emerson. He's the philosopher of cheerful purpose. I always love that. A philosopher of cheerful purpose. Now listen to what he says about this. This time, like all times, is a very good one if we but know what to do with it. Finish each day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense. Pretty good advice. I heard a cute story the other day. I don't know if it's apocryphal or true, but a woman in California, it was a hot day, and she wanted to get an ice cream cone, so she went down to the drugstore that served ice cream cones. And there was a long wait because it was a hot day, and so she kind of queued up, and she was getting close to the front. She was almost to the front. She happened to look around, and she thought that she spotted right behind her the famous actor, Paul Newman. Oh my goodness. She looked again. It was Paul Newman coming for an ice cream cone. So she said to herself, I got to think of a speech here. I got to think of something nice to say. And I don't want to make a mistake. And so she kind of went through her mind the things that she wanted to say to Paul Newman. And then she got her composure and she turned around. She says, you're Paul Newman, aren't you? And he said, yes, I am. And she thanked him for all his movies, his impact on the young, and went on. And she came and said thank you, and she shook his hand again. And so she was so pleased she got through it without a problem. And so she said, I can hardly wait to get out of here to call the kids, grandkids, tell them I met Paul Newman. So she paid for the ice cream cone, got outside, and she realized that she did not have the ice cream cone. So she went up to the front and she looked at the circular where all the ice cream cones that had been paid for were, and hers wasn't there. Just then, there was a tap on the shoulder, and it was Mr. Newman. And he said, are you looking for your ice cream cone? And she says, yes, as a matter of fact, I am. And he said, it's in your purse. Well, we all periodically put our ice cream cone in the purse, all right? I mean, it's part of life, folks. It's part of life. Now, I don't want to minimize how hard it is, because particularly when we've made bad decisions, or at least decisions that weren't up to what we now can say were better, it's not easy. But the key to life and to be resilient is to put those mistakes behind you. Now, the last point is really important. And that is when we go through difficult times, there are a host of people who really want to help us. There's a host of people who really want to help us. Now, oftentimes we feel like we got to go through our stuff alone. Marital difficulties, well, we don't really want to share those very much, and so we go through it alone. Problems at work, co-worker that's giving us fits. Well, we don't want to talk about it too much, and so we go it alone. Now, there's some good reasons at times for going alone, but I want to say is there are a host of people. We are surrounded, as in the New Testament talks about this, by a great cloud of witnesses that care about us, if we but let them into our lives. I want to say how important it is, particularly with your children, your grandchildren, your adult children, not to interfere in their lives, but to let them know that you are there. There are a host of people who want to help. After Katrina hit, one of the great writers for the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan, wrote this to talk about the host of people that surround us. If you gave just a few minutes on the news, you saw it all. The generosity and courage, the sense of community of people who really care about each other. You saw the pontoons and the air mattresses and the bass boats and the rowboats and the pool floats in which people were rescued. No one knows how many were saved or how many saved them. Every disaster at some point becomes a jumble, and people stop counting. But surely tens of thousands were saved. We saw it often live on television and the internet because of excellent reporters and crews. A mother with little children was marooned, the water in her home rising dangerously. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know if it was going to be too late. Suddenly, there were men outside the house coming for her. It was just an angel, she said, as she wept from the back of the boat. It is really true. There are a host of people that we can help and who can help us in going through adversity. So I close with one example, which I think is an example of better than any philosopher or any scientific study that I can give. And this happened after Irma was done. And as you may recall, Irma was a big hurricane, hit the East Coast, mainly the Florida Keys. $18 billion of damage was done by that one hurricane. 8 lives were lost. And as soon as the hurricane went in, CNN and every other news organization put in their reporters. And I'll never forget one interviewer. A reporter from, I believe it was CNN, went to a house that looked pretty much demolished. And the reporter said, I wonder if anybody is alive in there. And just then, the owner of the house, a fisherman, came out from all the rubble. And he looked around at all the destruction. And the destruction was immense where he was. Houses were blown over. automobiles were bobbing down the street. There was debris everywhere. But he spotted his fishing boat down there, and it looked like it was intact, even though there was so much debris around it. And the reporter asked this fisherman, "How do you feel?" And he said, "I feel utterly overwhelmed." And that is not an uncommon feeling that we all have going through tough times, overwhelmed. But then the reporter waited a moment as he surveyed the damage, and the reporter asked him this question, "What are you going to do?" And he looked at his bare feet and he said, "I'm going to put on some shoes because I know there's going to be a better day ahead." Now that, my friends, is resilience. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. We really appreciate that. It was great. And I'm really glad that you whispered in the lion's ear there at the beginning, because I was kind of being concerned that you'd have been eaten. And then we'd have been in big trouble. But we're very fortunate today to have Bob here to help us, I think, talk a lot about the creed. Being resilient, forgetting the mistakes of the past, making yourself a better person every day is what we want to do as optimists. So when you go back to your places of work, go back to your retirement job or what you think you're doing, and meeting your friends, wear that cheerful countenance at all times and be happy, because it will really make a difference. And for you, in bringing out the creed and things, I'd like to give a copy of our creed to have on your wall to help you remember all those things, to keep us resilient and make it a better day for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate it. He wants to get a couple of pictures.